Hey everyone, Shin here. So this past weekend was the beta event for the Elite Specializations coming in Path of Fire, and I figured I could bring you all an impressions video for Spellbreaker, similar to the ones I did for all the Elite Specializations back when Heart of Thorns was about to come out. Now, since I spent so much time testing the Spellbreaker, I actually didn't get a chance to test out any of the other Elite Specializations this weekend. I don't really have any thoughts or impressions that I can validly state on any of the other Elite Specs, just because I never had any hands-on time with them, and I feel it would be doing a disservice to them if I were to just spout opinions on just things I saw while I was fighting them. Spellbreaker, on the other hand, I probably put in around 14 to 18 hours testing this thing over the weekend, so I have a pretty good idea of my thoughts and opinions on how Spellbreaker works, what setups are good with it, what don't work so well, what things are kind of wonky right now, and I just wanted to run through those in this video. This will probably be a fair bit shorter than the ones that I put out for Heart of Thorns, just because it's pretty much entirely Spellbreaker. Just a quick reminder, these are just my opinions, these are just impressions I got after playing a whole bunch of Spellbreaker in different setups and whatnot. These aren't hard facts. You can feel free to disagree with me on anything I say during this video. These are just what I think of the specialization. I know there are a few people who are interested in that type of thing, but feel free to completely disregard anything I say. These are just opinions and impressions based on gameplay. Alright, so first is the new burst skill we got with Spellbreaker, the full counter burst. This is similar to how we got Berserk for Berserker, only this time it is considered a burst skill, just like all of our other ones, as opposed to being a rage skill or its own unique type of skill. And I'm just going to say it right away, I really like full counter. I like how it works, I like what it gives to the spec as a tool, I like how it can be used, I like the mechanics. It's just a very, very nice tool to have in the kit of Spellbreaker, and it actually allows a lot of surprising synergy and a lot of surprising setups that you wouldn't have otherwise expected Warrior to be taking after the past few years, where we've kind of been stuck doing similar things for certain kinds of builds. You're running similar skills and running similar trait lines, etc. Whereas with Spellbreaker, after doing a whole bunch of testing, I was running things that I was not expecting to be able to run ever, or at least anytime soon. It freed up just a lot of opportunities to run more offensive things. It allowed me to run different traits that were not something I was expecting to be able to use right away. It's just fun, and it's really useful, and it was something that I really enjoyed messing around with and adjusting with the different traits that affect it. I can't really gush anymore about full counter. I just really like how it works and really like what it brings to the table for Spellbreaker. As for all of the other burst skills that we get just normally on our F1, the fact that they're all tier 1 is fine. I didn't really have an issue with that because I was still able to stack things like Adrenal Health and Berserker's Power pretty reliably, and it didn't feel like I was really missing out on anything by not being able to get tier 2 and tier 3 of those traits on the first hit. If I wanted to do that, I could have just gone Core Warrior and gotten that effect, but I didn't feel like Spellbreaker was really hindered by only having the tier 1 versions of everything. Things worked out perfectly fine as far as I could tell. Alright, now for the daggers. As a whole, I really like how they play. I really like how they work, how they feel. They add some nice options for different setups with the Berserker. I'll talk about these a little later. They're just fun to use. They've got nice synergy with each other and with a lot of the other weapon sets we've got available. I didn't really have any issues with the skills overall, but there were two that had small issues that bothered me. The number 2, at the very end of it, there's like a very, very small aftercast that pauses your movement and it doesn't let you cast anything else. It doesn't make it feel clunky, but it could feel smoother if that wasn't there. And then on the number 5, this one I was bothered by a little more. It doesn't feel like it scales very well with power. It's fine if it does lower damage because it's doing the reflect and the vulnerability stacking, all that stuff, but it still feels fairly weak. It still feels like it could be doing more damage, especially when you have like 25 stacks of might or fury or something that's adding to it. I was testing it with both no might and a Berserker amulet and full might and fury and a Berserker amulet, and the damage didn't really feel any different between those two, and it was capping out at maybe 5k total damage. It felt weak compared to a lot of the other skills we had available, and just a lot of the other dagger skills in general. It just didn't feel as satisfying to use. I typically would opt for the 4, and I would really only use the 5 for maybe breaking Aegis or clearing blind. So my main issue with daggers as a whole is just the 5 feels weak. The burst skill on Dagger, that was nice. I really liked the Heartseeker-esque nice gap closer boon removal that the burst skill for Dagger brings, and it helps the Dagger set feel a bit more mobile, especially when comboed with the 2. I was able to actually stick to targets pretty well by comboing the 2 and the burst together, and with how much adrenaline I was generating, it was not hard to be able to do that combo over and over. So as a whole, daggers were fun. It's just the 2 has that little itty-bitty aftercast thing, and the 5 just doesn't feel quite rewarding enough. Alright, moving on to utilities. These are probably where I have the most issues and criticism with Spellbreaker in its current iteration. There were some issues with how things felt with kind of their functionality that I was either questioning or didn't really agree with, things like that, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. The Spellbreaker heal, natural healing, I initially thought this was going to be kind of a meh skill. I initially thought that it was maybe too long, or the fact that rip boons may have been a detriment and whatnot, but after messing around with it and using it in builds that were able to either give it quickness very often or otherwise synergized well with it, it actually turned out to be a really powerful heal, and actually made Heal Signet feel worse in a lot of situations. There were actually several setups where I'm like, I want natural healing for this. I don't really like Heal Signet for XYZ reason. And so that was a pleasant surprise. I really liked the heal for Spellbreaker. I know it was kind of divisive for a lot of people, but I personally found it a lot of fun and very effective. Featherfoot Grace I also really liked. It was just a nice stun break skill to have in the Spellbreaker kit. It was competitive with things like Balance Stance, roughly the same cooldown. It gave you resistance and super speed to help you stick to targets or get out of fights if you needed to. It was nice for essentially giving you a safe moment to pop natural healing because you didn't have to worry about fears or anything like that. It's just a nice skill to have. It feels like a true utility skill where you can use it in a lot of different situations. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like an upgrade from something like Balance Stance, where you can choose between, super speed and a bit more aggressive stun break, or you can take something a bit more defensive and get pulsing stability, or a big stack of stability with, say, Doliaxing it. I just like how Featherfoot Grace fits into the warrior kit as a whole with Spellbreaker. And next up is Sight Beyond Sight. I couldn't really find a good place to put this. I couldn't really find a good reason to use this utility skill. The idea behind it, I understand, and the idea behind it, I find neat. It's a nice AoE reveal, it removes blind, it gives you a guaranteed crit on your next attack, but it just didn't seem worth taking over things like Endure Pain, Balance Stance, Featherfoot Grace, Berserker. It just didn't feel like it was worth the slot. The count charge of 20 seconds seems a bit prohibitive, especially when there's only 2 charges. It has a radius that makes it really only good for, say, trying to reveal thieves on a point. In Worldly World, you're probably going to be AoEing out anyone who's stealth near the warriors who are frontline anyway. Roaming, the thief could be just out of range of it. It doesn't feel like it does enough, or its design just doesn't really benefit putting it on your bar. It's a very weird meditation to have. I didn't find any good use for it. When I tried running it, it felt like a dead skill. It just didn't feel good to use. It was just weird. I'm not particularly a fan of Sight Beyond Sight because I don't really know where to use it. Alright, for Imminent Threat, I like the idea behind it, but I have 2 main issues with it. The first, the cooldown seems a little long. Maybe bring it down to like 30 and it'll probably feel a bit better. It just felt a little long for what it's doing. And the other thing was it felt too small. The 240 radius on Imminent Threat feels too small, especially when you compare it to all of the other AoE utilities the Spellbreak has. They are all 360. Imminent Threat being 240 makes it feel small by comparison, and in addition to that, it doesn't have a clear visual indicator to the player as to the area that it's reaching. If it had a nice clear, say, on-the-ground indicator of how far it reaches, then I could see just getting used to the radius and then it wouldn't be too big of a deal. But there's no clear indication of where it's reaching when you use it, so it's hard to learn how big that 240 radius is with the animation. I feel like, if anything, it needs to have that radius increased. You could even leave the cooldown as is, just increase the radius to 360 and it'll feel better. But as it currently stands, it just feels weird to use. It feels inconsistent with all of the other AoEs that the Spellbreaker has for utilities, and I feel like it could be a bit bigger. The taunt duration is fine, the retail duration is fine. I don't have any problems with what you get for successfully using it. It's just using it itself feels weird. For Break Enchantment, I like how it felt. I like the cooldown, I like what it does. The only issue I had with it, it felt like I would remove the boons and then those boons would be right back on my targets and the damage was kind of negligible. I just didn't really feel it was making enough of an impact to warrant putting it in the slot. Maybe if there was, say, a half-second or 1 second boon application prevention debuff on the opponents, that might make its impact feel a bit better, but that might make it overpowered. I'm not sure. It felt good, it just didn't feel impactful enough, is what I'm getting at for Break Enchantments. Now, finally for the Elite, I actually liked Winds of Disenchantment quite a bit. It felt perfectly useful when I got it off. I actually didn't have too much trouble casting Winds of Disenchantment, even in PvP, putting it on point in the middle of a team fight. It wasn't too big of a deal. The fact that it blocks projectiles and just completely annihilates any boons on your opponents, it's nice for zoning. The cooldown doesn't feel too long. It's just a nice Elite. It's definitely more applicable to World v World, I would say. PvP, you can make a case for it, but I feel like this was kind of designed for frontlining setups in World v World. It's definitely not something I would want to use while roaming in World v World. It's not something I want to use in, say, a build that's moving from point to point a lot in PvP. Unless there's, say, a raid boss or a fractal boss or something that just vomits boons, I don't really see it having a lot of PvE application either. But as a whole, I like the Elite. I didn't notice anything that really broke how it felt or really felt weird or bad with the Elite. It was just a nice thing to have, and it was applicable to a few different situations. Now, one final note on the utilities before I move on. I do acknowledge that some of these utilities are probably designed more specifically for things like World v World, things like Break Enchantment, things like Imminent Threat. I completely acknowledge that those could very well just be designed for the large-scale, big AoE fight frontline massacres that happen in World v World. Break Enchantment immediately comes to mind as something that would not need what I just talked about with the debuff or anything that in World v World. Just shattering those boons on a lot of people would make it very good for that. Imminent Threat, even in World v World, I still feel would suffer from the radius issue, but I could definitely still see it being more useful there. Sight Beyond Sight, I still don't really think it would be that useful in World v World, even in a frontline situation, just because you're probably not going to find a lot of stealth people in there, and while it's nice for removing the blind, I can really only see using it for maybe guaranteeing, say, an Earthshaker crit. Just Sight Beyond Sight is just, I didn't really find a good way to use it in any situation. Alright, now moving on to traits. I really like the Spellbreaker traits both individually and as a whole. I like the fact that they kept kind of each row affects the same theme of skills or effects or whatever. And I also like the fact that each individual trait is applicable to a majority of builds that you can run with Spellbreaker. There's only a few traits where it's obvious that you don't want to take it for a certain build. Things like Sun and Moon style, you obviously don't want to take that if you're not using daggers. But on the whole, most of them can be used with a wide variety of different combinations, a wide variety of different builds. I was pleasantly surprised at how well I was able to use different traits that I wouldn't really initially think to use with certain setups. Now, as far as each individual trait goes, I don't have a whole lot of opinions on them. They're all pretty nice, they all do something, they all are effective in different builds, like I mentioned before. There's only maybe a handful that I have any sort of commentary on. The first one is Guard Counter. I didn't really notice guard counter going off. Maybe the protection didn't last long enough, but it just didn't feel like I wasn't getting much out of the trait. I still used it periodically. It could very well have been helping me out. I didn't notice it, and it didn't seem to make any real difference in my survivability. Maybe if the protection was slightly longer, maybe 5 seconds, it might be a bit more ideal, but again, I didn't notice it, and maybe it was just doing its job, and I wasn't paying attention. The other one, loss aversion, I didn't really notice the impact of loss aversion. I tried using it. I tried using loss aversion so many times, but I never really felt like it was doing a whole lot. I didn't notice the adrenaline generation. I didn't notice the damage coming off it. It just, I don't know, loss aversion didn't feel impactful enough. I don't know what could be done to really make it feel more impactful, but I just know as it currently is, it doesn't feel like it's doing much. Again, this could be something that's more prevalent in World v. World, and it's just I was in the wrong scale of fights to really get much out of it. And then the third one I have a comment on is Magebane Tether. This is not criticism, this is praise. I love Magebane Tether. It's so much fun to use. I love the fact that it's building so much might and revealing your opponent, and then if they try and run away or you run away from them, you can yank them back. I've even had a situation where myself and another warrior, we Magebane tethered each other and then split and then ripped each other back. It was really funny. Magebane Tether is a ton of fun. It's easily my favorite trait of the bunch. Alright, and finally, how does Spellbreaker fit into different roles and different build types, so to speak? I spent a ton of time trying to get an answer for myself for this question. How well does it work for Condi? How well does it work for Bunker? Power damage? Things like that. I tried a wide variety of builds to try and figure this out. And after probably 18 hours, like I mentioned before, I finally have a good idea of what works and what doesn't. As far as what worked, I found that any sort of build that was high burst damage, high power based damage, a lot of might stacking, things like that, seemed to work the best. Where you would, say, run into a team fight, pick a target, and then just jump on them and blow them up with big crits, big damage. That seemed to be kind of the forte of Spellbreaker. Kind of like a thief or just a general assassin playstyle where you would just pick a target, jump on them, blow them up, move to the next, and that was it. That seemed to be where I had the most success and where things seemed to synergize the best when playing Spellbreaker in PvP. The traits all tend to lean towards power damage and spikes of damage. They all tend to have this kind of power bias to them, so it would make sense that doing that type of gameplay or that type of role would be what the Spellbreaker is most effective at. Now, I did also try doing more of a kind of brawler style Spellbreaker where it was still power based, but it was more about staying in the fight and, trading blows, CCing people, pulling them around. I did have a decent amount of success doing that, and I was able to stay alive fairly well. But the problem I ran into was it didn't feel like it was doing that job as effective as, say, a core warrior could do. Where a core warrior is able to not only have the benefits of defense and benefits of strength and discipline, it's also getting the tier 3 versions of things like adrenal health, of Berserker's power. It just felt like that role, that situation that I was trying to do with Spellbreaker is just better filled by core warrior. Now, I also tried some condition builds, and what I found with those is you can make them work with Spellbreaker. There are various synergies that will allow you to put a decent amount of conditions on someone and have a decent amount of damage come from those conditions. The Revenge counter trait in Spellbreaker's Grandmaster line is very nice for a condition set for Spellbreaker. However, similar to the Brawler playstyle and how Core Warrior kind of outdoes Spellbreaker in that, I found that the condition theme or the condition role for Spellbreaker could have just as easily, if not better, be done by Berserker. So it's one of those things where if you really like how Spellbreaker works, but you want to do more of a condition build, you can still make it work from what I could tell, but it seems like that's something that's more the realm of Berserker, and you may as well just run that instead of Spellbreaker. And then finally, I did try and do some bunker builds with Spellbreaker. They didn't really go so well. I kinda made them work, but they did not feel very good at all. It was kind of just a low damage power build. Bunkered Spellbreaker, it does not feel good as far as I'm concerned. If you're going to run a Bunker Warrior, you may as well run either Berserker with something like Rousing Resilience or Core Warrior, and you'll probably get a much better result. Bunker Spellbreaker just doesn't seem like it'll really work that well. It seems like it can be bursted through too easily. It can't out-sustain a lot of other builds that you'll be running into. Bunker Spellbreaker, someone is welcome to try and make one work. I tried it. It didn't really work out so well, and I'm not so keen on trying to do it again. Alright, now, as a whole, what do I think of Spellbreaker? I am very impressed and very happy with what I was able to play and what I was able to test this past weekend. Spellbreaker as a whole feels a lot better designed, a lot more complete than Berserker was. It allows for a lot more synergy between itself and Core Warrior aspects. It feels like I can use different setups than I would otherwise expect viably with the Spellbreaker, as opposed to Berserker, where it was kind of just, you can use this, and that's about it. Spellbreaker feels like it has a lot more synergy and a lot more possibilities for viable combos with Core Warrior's aspects than Berserker feels like it does with Core Warrior aspects. I like how it has that flexibility. I like how it plays. I like full counter. I like Dagger. As a whole, I really like how Spellbreaker works, and I can't wait to get my hands on this thing on the live client when the expansion comes out. I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. For where it fits into each of the different game modes, World v. World seems to be where this thing is best suited for. It seems where most of its traits and utilities really seem like they would get the most use out of. However, I can definitely see a case being made for it in some PvP situations. That being said, I think you might just want to take, say, a Scourge or a Reaper or something that is better at ripping boons for like organized PvP over a Spellbreaker. Roaming in World v. World, I can see it being useful, but it may or may not be outclassed by Core Warrior in doing that. Same goes for just general PvP usage. You might want to run Core Warrior or Berserker over Spellbreaker. And for PvE, that remains to be seen. I can't really say for sure without seeing people testing the numbers on, say, DPS golems, or seeing what the boss fights or the fractal fights are going to be in Path of Fire. Maybe the raids might have some mechanics, or the new fractals might have some mechanics that incentivize taking Spellbreaker. But as a whole, it just seems like it's kind of focused on large-scale World v. World. That's where it fits its niche the best. But thankfully, it can be used in these other realms. It's just, if you're really trying to min-max, it's probably going to be outclassed by a fair number of things. All that being said, it's a lot of fun, and that's the main thing I care about. It's a lot of fun, it's effective, it suits the playstyle that I enjoy almost to a T. Alright, and with that, those are my impressions and opinions on the Spellbreaker as it's currently available for testing. I spent a lot of time this weekend, maybe a bit more than I should have, to try and figure these out, but I wanted to bring you guys some nice, detailed impressions, and I also just wanted to get them for myself and have a good idea of what I can expect. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I will catch you around either the stream or in the next video. Take care.